So I've been putting this video off for a very, very long time, mainly because I'm trying to get a little bit better at it. I'd like to talk about some of the most influential video games in my life. I was actually a pretty active kid. I played a lot outside as a young kid, and I existed in a magical land before the internet, in an amazing galaxy known as the 80s. And in the 1980s, yes, we did have video games, but they were a totally different kind of video game. Defender was a really important game to me personally, but in my house, Pac-Man was the game. We had an Atari 2600, and my father and my mother, I guess, competed with each other, but I was pretty young. All I remember is the Atari was in their bedroom, and I used to go in their bedroom to play the Atari and to watch He-Man cartoons. But Defender was the game that I played. I played E.T., never could figure out what the hell I was supposed to do. I want to say I was like probably 6 or around there, but I remember vividly playing Defender. I remember the beeps and boops, but I just remember starting to figure out what I was supposed to do. It was like the first game where I started to figure out. I saw a comment once that was saying that your first video game sort of defines you as a gamer. Flight games have always been good games to me, but Defender was the first video game that I remember. An honorable mention I'm going to throw in right here is the Oregon Trail, because in school, we had an Apple IIe computer at school that had the Oregon Trail, and we played it in school. But as far as the most influential game at the time, Defender was that game on the Atari 2600. Dragon Warrior for the NES. Why is this game so influential when there were better Dragon Warrior games? Because it was the first. The NES has so many classics, all of which that we could talk at great length about. But Dragon Warrior was a very special game for me personally. My father has been gone now almost 20 years, and I remember going to New York City on the train from New Jersey with my mother and father and brother, and when we went to Macy's, he bought me Dragon Warrior. That game, I still remember, cost $80. It was, remember that even then, it was a lot of money. It came with a battery installed so you could save your game, and that was like huge for Nintendo at the time. And that game, I'm not entirely sure sold the best, but that game reappeared years later in my life because I just kept going back to it. The music in that game I've tried to play over the years, but Dragon Quest, as it became later on, became one of the most pivotal, and is still personally one of the most pivotal series as far as RPGs go. Dragon Warrior was one of the most influential games in my life because of the memories that I still have. And it's just a really good game. When I got my Sega Genesis somewhere around the 90s, Phantasy Star 3, the reason that game became so influential in my life is because of Palmer Video and later Blockbuster Video. Back when this was still pre-internet, you could not find Phantasy Star 3 in the stores. I don't know why, but my parents couldn't find it. We used to get video games at Toys R Us. I still remember how they sold them. You'd go to the aisle that had the Nintendo games and later the Genesis games, and there was a card that was like a picture, and you would flip it up, and it had the back and the front. That was how you saw the game, and it was just an aisle with the cards, and then you would take the ticket out of the thing at Toys R Us, and you would bring it to this like plexiglass window in the stock room and hand them the ticket, and they would give you an actual copy of the game. It was a pretty smart way to keep people from shoplifting, I guess. But we used to buy games based on the picture. But when Phantasy Star 3 came out, I still remember the Genesis lore that drew everybody in. But the first RPG that just changed my gaming life was Generations of Doom, Phantasy Star 3, because it had multiple endings. Now, Chrono Trigger did, but my brother was the one with the Super NES. I eventually sort of, usurped his SNES because he never played it anymore. Simultaneously have to put NHL 95 in there. Now, I actually played 90, 93 and 94 as well, but NHL 95 brought me into street hockey and playing ice hockey. So that game is hugely influential. The Genesis era, those two games are almost equally as influential in my life. I could go on so much more about why those games influenced my life so much, and I would love to talk at great length about each individual game at some later time. The most influential game for me was a game I didn't even own personally. That was Final Fantasy III. Final Fantasy III was a game that a friend of mine had who really helped me get into the Super Nintendo, and it was because every time I would sleep over their house, he and his younger sister always were playing. We would go back and forth and borrow games. I still remember when he and his group of friends were talking about Metroid, and I didn't understand that game. I had it, and I didn't understand it. My passwords would never get me. I used to call him up. I used to call the Nintendo hotline, the 900 Nintendo hotline. I had Nintendo Power, but yeah. Anyway, when Final Fantasy III, by the time Final Fantasy III came out, that's 6 in Japan, RPGs had become so story driven. But when that game, when the music started and the credits came up, that was the first gaming experience that I ever had that made me feel like I was watching a movie. I knew that I was getting ready to play one of the most epic role-playing games. Wow, that game. And then as you get farther, the opera and the train, like the ghost train, and then the final battle is just unbelievable. But wow, that game. I could go on for so long about Final Fantasy III. Most influential computer game. The most influential computer game was in the early 95, 96 era. We got a IBM Aptiva. We had a few computers, a compact. We had, in that time, you couldn't keep up with computer technology. My family really couldn't, because that was around the time when my father had his stroke and started to get really sick. But we still did some internet play with my next door neighbor, where we played Warcraft, and that was Warcraft 2, Tides of Darkness, and Doom. We did like little dial-up crazy lag parties, but it was still fun. I was still learning PCs, and I haven't really gotten that much farther all these years later. But the game that roped me in was a CD-ROM called X-Wing Collector CD. I loved, and once again, it was I had role-playing games before that, and I jumped back into a flight game. Right around that time was when I bought myself 2 different joysticks before I found one that could actually roll correctly and didn't go the other way, and the configuration of top left to center, bottom, but that thing, with the suction cups, and I spent so much time. I think you were still connecting to the internet with AOL and Prodigy and CompuServe at the time. Was CompuServe one of those ones? I think so. I don't think we had that one. But it was like you got the CD and you had to buy it for 3 months or some crap like that. But yeah, X-Wing, the best part about that was the patch. It taught me that, you know, if there was a problem with the game, there was somebody on a chat room somewhere that had a patch for it. And I don't even know if the guy worked for it, but there was one level where, like, the Calamarian cruiser would not go to hyperspace before the time ran out. Well, anyway, I could go into each individual game, but in the interest of keeping this a shorter video, I'll just say that X-Wing Collector's CD was an unbelievable. LucasArts was an amazing company for a long period of time in my book. Nintendo 64. The Nintendo 64, I have to put two big titles in here. First and foremost, I'm going to start with Rogue Squadron. Rogue Squadron was amazing. Now, Shadows of the Empire was the first trailer that I said, I'm getting a Nintendo 64. I think I had already gone to college and got a Nintendo 64, and I had to get Shadows of the Empire. But the most influential game in that flight genre, Star Wars genre, was Rogue Squadron. Oh my gosh. Just going back to try to get gold medals on everything so that you could unlock the Naboo Starfighter. Boy, was that tough. But it was so worth it to me. It was such a rewarding, replayable level. And the story was great. But at the time, these 64-bit graphics were mind-boggling. And I could not talk about the Nintendo 64 without bringing up one of my favorite Zeldas, Ocarina of Time. The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. I can almost hear that intro music because it got me through some very, very difficult times after losing my father. I played that game solid. I played Ocarina of Time solid, and I wanted to do everything. I wanted to max out my hearts. I just wanted to go back and keep playing it because there was just, I mean, playing the instrument, there was nothing like that. I've still said that the one thing missing from Breath of the Wild is really getting to play an instrument. Ocarina of Time, it's just, there's so much has been said, but so much needs to be said about what an influence Zelda is in a young adult's life. I have to say this. I remember the first time I saw somebody else playing that game, the two things that just blew my mind was Link grabbing a chicken, floating down into this mountain city, and there's a windmill, and then they go into this cave, and he's got a stick, and he sets it on fire and burns a spider web. And I'm thinking, I gotta buy this game. I gotta buy this game. How do I not have this game? This is a Zelda game? This is nothing like the Zelda that I remember. Ocarina of Time. In the interest of keeping it short, there were a lot of amazing PlayStation 2 games. But the most influential PlayStation 2 game, because of when it came in my life, what it did with my life, and the kind of game it was, Grand Theft Auto 3 is the most influential PlayStation 2 game in my life. There is nothing like Grand Theft Auto. There still is, and everything that is like Grand Theft Auto straight up copied it from Grand Theft Auto 3. And the best part about it is not just that it's like a mature kind of game. It was that it was so many kinds of games at once. I remember Crazy Taxi. It had the Crazy Taxi levels. I mean, you could sprint, you did the rampage missions, you had story missions. I got in the Dodo and I flew that thing around all 3 islands because I figured out how to fly it, of course. You know, there were just so much, and then it was just chill with your friends and, dude, how long can you last with 5 stars? Hey, let's get in the tank. Let's get in the tank and see how long we last. Just nothing like it at the time. Never will a game, I think, encompass a brand new genre like that. It was a collection of games in one game. The Nintendo Wii. I picked up a Nintendo Wii almost at the end of the Nintendo Wii's life cycle. I worked at Target when the Nintendo Wii came out. I worked at Target that Christmas. I remember, I worked overnight stock, so I remember the people camped out to try to get one. I always felt bad for them because I just could not believe that in that many months, you still couldn't get it. I remember the day that I picked up a copy of Twilight Princess for the GameCube version, and my boss was like, if you want to buy it, we can set it aside and you buy it when you get out of here. I was like, nah, I think I kind of want to get this Wii. But I wasn't able to get a Wii until I moved out of California. I got it at the end of its life cycle, almost in 2011, I think. Right when Skyward Sword came out. That was right around the time, and I had to catch up on a whole genre. But was Skyward Sword or Twilight Princess the most influential Wii game in my life? No. Influential doesn't always mean the best. But Wii Sport Resort was the most influential Wii game in the Wii's life cycle for me. And it is because it brought my mother into gaming. It brought my mother's boyfriend into gaming. I bought them a Wii. I still remember helping my nephews playing, what were we doing? What was the Wii Sport game we were playing on their thing? I can't remember, but archery was the thing where I was like, you can get secret targets. My friend's parents, when we were still in California, I was going through some really rough times in California, which is why I could not buy a Wii for myself. But I vowed one day I'm going to buy this thing and I'm going to catch up. Secret targets, island flyover, the frisbee dog, frisbee golf, bowling. Wii Sport Resort was one of those games that I will still go back to year after year and just be like, you know what, play this with me. See, the thing about influence in gaming is it influenced me as a person. I don't blame video games for making me an angry person. I'm an angry person who needed an outlet. I'm a creative person that needed an outlet. The games influenced my life. The most influential games. What are your most influential games? I can't wait to be influenced in the generations to come for video games. I just hope I can still see, I can still hear, and I can still play. Thanks for watching.